Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it. People often meet unexpectedly, but these meetings influence future events and sometimes turn the whole life around. Something like this happened to Elizabeth. Elizabeth and her sister Leslie, who was 2 years older than her, lived with their grandmother. The grandmother was not that old, still working, and was the guardian of the girls, who had been orphaned by a tragic accident. The family lived in the suburbs. The girls' father worked as a tractor driver, their mother as a cook at the school. One day in the fall, the father was loading hay and left some in the loader to bring to lunchtime for his animals. The weather was lovely that day. The sun was shining gently. The breeze was touching the body tenderly, and it was so calm and pleasant on the soul that John, the girl's father, felt such happiness, such joy in life, that he wanted to sing. After the army, he met Maidie, and she seemed so desirable to him that he could not imagine life without her. Her fluffy hair, affectionate look, malleability fell into his soul from the first meeting. Soon they got married. When John drove into the yard, Maddie was tending to a calf. John suddenly wanted to play a joke on Maddie, so he decided to pile the fragrant hay right at Maddie's feet. But at that moment, something happened to the hoist, and it crashed down on the poor woman and the calf. Maddie didn't even have time to cry out. The impact was on her head. John, white as a wall, got off the tractor in a flash. When he saw the terrible picture, he howled like a wounded animal. Clutching his head and biting his bloody lips, John was mad with grief. His eyes rested on the rope with which the calf was tied. The solution came instantly. The only thought drilling into his brain was, "What have I done? How can I live without her? I can't. The neighbor, hearing some incomprehensible sounds, John's heartbreaking scream, rushed to the neighbor's yard. But it was too late. What she saw so shocked her that she almost fainted. That day the girls were orphaned. Leslie was 6 years old and Elizabeth was 4. 12 years had passed. Leslie, an 18-year-old girl, is in culinary school. Very attractive, tall, with dark hair and big brown eyes. She resembles her father. Elizabeth is 16 years old, graduating from high school. A calm, balanced girl. She studies well and dreams of entering the University of Chemical Technology. Elizabeth, like her mother, with blue eyes, fluffy hair, short, with surprisingly beautiful proportions of the body, both brought up in strictness, for which we must give credit to their grandmother Aubrey, who devoted the rest of her life to these girls. She was widowed early and had a hard time. The money she earned and received for the children was often not enough. She had to live modestly on a shoestring. Elizabeth was rarely bought new things, mostly left from her older sister, but she did not hold a grudge. The girl often dreamed that she would finish school, will work, buy herself everything, and even be able to surprise her grandmother and sister with gifts. Leslie has already been taking care of guys. Elizabeth sometimes saw how happy Leslie was after a date. She herself would be 17 soon, and none of the boys would even come near her. She began to look in the mirror more often, and was always dissatisfied with her appearance. It seemed to her that she had a long nose, inexpressive eyes, and for some reason very fluffy eyelashes, and lips in general small and chubby, like a child. Classmates have already met with guys, and often met at recess. Elizabeth saw this and felt somehow insecure. She did not understand how you can share with friends personal experiences. The girl read a lot. It should be said that the books of that time, as well as programs on television, were subjected to a fairly strict censorship. In the masses came out literature, which was supposed to bring up a highly spiritual, morally stable citizen. Fiction publications spoke more about the beautiful side of love, duty, respect. Elizabeth was brought up on this, This is how she imagined her future love and knew that between a man and a woman there should be a bright feeling that will bind them for life. But it hadn't happened to her yet, and she waited with hope for the meeting, which it seemed to her should be happy, special, and for life. The spring of 1970 came, prepared for the holiday on March 8. In the school where Leslie studied were to come to the conscript soldiers with amateur art, congratulate the girls on International Women's Day. Leslie and her friend, with excitement, going to this event. They put on their best dresses, giggled, and tweaked their bangs. Leslie applied snowflake foundation to her face and became even more attractive. Elizabeth watched them and was a little envious. Angelica, Leslie's girlfriend, seeing Elizabeth, suddenly suggested, "Let's take Elizabeth with us." "Will you come with us, Elizabeth?" "Can we?" Leslie said she had to ask her grandmother, but grandmother was not at home, and the girls decided to take Elizabeth with them without asking. She was quickly dressed, painted her face, lips, and went to the school. In the foyer, there were already a lot of people. Soldiers in neutered uniforms with white collars, polished buttons, cut and shaved, seemed to be an example of decency and imitation. Music was blaring. Dressed-up girls, giggling, stood aside. Soon the hosts opened the evening. The soldiers sang in chorus, recited poems, played guitar and accordion. Elizabeth liked the guy who sang a song about his mother. He was of medium height, very handsome, and had an excellent voice. And the song was so heartfelt. Everyone clapped for a long time and asked him to sing an encore. Then the guys played wind instruments and started dancing to live music. It was so beautiful and solemn. Elizabeth watched her sister twirling with the tall guy, Angelica laughing with the sergeant. She'd already decided that it was time for her to leave, that no one would invite her. She felt sad and bored at this party. Suddenly, someone in a warm voice said to her, "May I invite you?" Elizabeth stood there with her eyes wide open in disbelief. In front of her was the same guy who sang about Mom. Slightly embarrassed, she said yes. And then she first felt a man's hand on her waist. Inside, everything was somehow squeezed. It was scary and pleasant to feel the warmth of a strong hand. Elizabeth danced easily. She felt the music, her soul sang, and the guy looked at her directly, and she was embarrassed by this look. If she had not been so innocent, she would have realized that the look was insolent. That evening, Elizabeth danced only with him. It pulled her tighter and tighter against him, and she thought that was the way it was. Embarrassed to say, she was uncomfortable. At the end of the evening, they met. "Jack," he said, and shook her hand firmly. "Elizabeth," she replied. He asked for her address. She gave it, and so she received her first letter in which Jack explained his feelings, asked for a date when he went on furlough. Elizabeth read the letter, and her heart beat harder, and her heart beat harder. It was so exciting, anxious, and joyful at the same time. The girl gave her consent. Elizabeth was overwhelmed by feelings, and look, it affected her grades. One day in chemistry class, the teacher noticed, "Elizaveta, if you have not changed your mind to enter chemical engineering, you need to pull up." And Elizabeth was busy dreaming about Jack. He wrote often, and every time it seemed to her that everything was he. She had met her great love for life. In class, she was often seen smiling distractedly. At home, too, Elizabeth's moods were noticed. Grandma got worried, but Leslie calmed her down. "I will soon serve. To demobile 4 months left, and we'll go home." And so he came on a date. It is impossible to convey in words what Elizabeth felt after the first kiss. It was so sweet and so eager to do it again that she let Jack kiss her hands, her lips, her neck. Sometimes she shook with a small tremor, a state that the boy liked very much. "Will you marry me?" "I have to go to school," was the answer. "But it's such a long wait, and my demob is soon." "Let's go to my place. We'll have a wedding, and you'll study by correspondence." "I have to think about it," said Elizaveta. "Please think about it," Jack asked. Elizabeth never thought about the final outcome of the meetings. In the evening, reading Jack's next letter of confession, she didn't know what she should do. She understood that it was too early to marry, that she had to study. But remembering their meetings, the feeling she had experienced, she was afraid that Jack would go away, leave her and marry someone else, and no one would ever look at her again, that no one would ever look at her again, that no one would want her. She remembered how he sang a song about her mother, whom of course he loved very much. Elizabeth did not know motherly love, did not have time to feel it. Grandmother was always in business, strict in upbringing, loved the girls in her own way. She was like a dictator in the family. Everyone obeyed her will. I am an adult, so Elizabeth thought, and I can do whatever I want. Not my grandmother. At the next meeting with Jack, Elizabeth was thoughtful and silent. I'm 3 weeks away from D-Mob, he said. Make up your mind. I'm waiting for your consent. I don't know, Elizabeth said, because somehow you get married, and then you get married. You know very well that it is impossible. Yes, Elizabeth knew that Jack lived in a village somewhere in Alaska, that he had 3 brothers and 2 older sisters. When he finished the 8th grade, he went to school as a mechanic, but did not graduate because he had a fight with the teacher. Then for 2 years, he lived at a log cabin in the forest with his grandfather and was drafted into the army in a construction battalion. Elizabeth, in his youth and naivety, did not give it all meaning and saw only light in his biography. In fact, Jack did not really wait for Elizabeth's consent. He easily got acquainted with girls. But, seeing the softness of Elizabeth, decided that with such a wife will be easy to live. She is young, does not know people well. Life in wealth has not seen, and besides loves him and therefore will forgive a lot. And Jack also wanted to prove to Leslie. Her name was exactly the same as Elizabeth's sister's, which made it even more unpleasant, his ex-girlfriend, who had not waited for him and married someone else. How good he was. He had found such a young one, such a beauty. Let Leslie curl up with anger and envy. Jack's family really lived in a village 200 kilometers from the district center. The village was located in the forest. To get to it in the fall, and spring on the off-road was almost impossible. The inhabitants mainly lived by fishing for pine nuts, kept livestock. Jack's family led a dissolute life. Father, mother, and their close relatives liked to go on a bender for 56 days. The children were practically neglected. The older sisters had married several times, which was not common in those years, and both had 2 children from different marriages. They all lived together in one hut. One of the brothers was serving in the army for the first year. The other 2 were hanging around the village, doing nothing, and could have a good drink on any good occasion. Quarrels and fights were common in the family. Everyone talked without hesitation. This was the atmosphere into which Jack had decided to bring Elizabeth, who had no idea of such a life. Time passed, and the demobilization drew near. Jack had written only 3 letters home during his service, and received 1. He was not allowed to go on leave because of his misconduct and bad service. A fellow soldier, knowing Jack's attitude, wanted to tell Elizabeth about her lover, his behavior in the army, and everything he knew about the family. But the circumstances were such that he could not meet Elizabeth. Meanwhile, Elizabeth successfully passed her exams, received her certificate, and decided to enroll, and with Jack wanted to agree not to hurry with the wedding. Elizabeth rode in the train, having handed in the documents for admission to the university. The mood was just fine. Someone sat down next to her. She turned around and saw Jack. What a coincidence. Her soul just sang. He took her in his arms and kissed her with feeling. The neighbors murmured disapprovingly. In those years, such behavior was condemned. Young people had to restrain their feelings. Elizabeth became uncomfortable. Feeling awkward, she asked in a whisper, "Why did you do it?" "I have already served," he announced cheerfully. "Tonight is our train. We go together. I decided so. I love you, and I can't be without you." "But I..." She had no time to say anything before he covered her mouth with a sweet kiss. "I don't want to know anything, or don't you love me?" "I do," she whispered softly. I have to tell my grandmother and sister, and I have entrance exams in a month and a half. You're an adult with your own life, and you can study by correspondence. Let's get off at Laconnor, and then we'll go to yours and explain everything. They rode to Laconnor with their arms around each other, no longer embarrassed by the other passengers. In Laconnor, they went to a cafe at the station, both of them hungry. The waitress was looking at Elizabeth carefully. Once again approaching the table, she asked Jack, "What about Sylvester?" "It's all gone," Jack replied. "And Sylvester is who?" "Sylvesterto." "Yes, it's a friend in the service," Elizabeth heard back. The waitress shook her head and did not approach again. "I have to go out for a while. Wait for me, okay?" Jack asked and kissed Elizabeth. When he returned, Elizabeth saw a glint in his eyes and a satisfied smile. "Have you been drinking?" "Why?" "I'm happy I've done my service, and you're there for me." "What's the occasion?" "Come on, I'll introduce you to someone." They went out, and after a block, they came to a ground floor apartment in a 5-story building. Jack had the key to the apartment. Explaining that a friend had left the key, he opened the door. The room was uncomfortable with a musty odor. Jack offered to come in, but said he would put the kettle on and lock the door. Elizabeth was wary. Something told her to run away, that this was no place for you. Jack came out in a t-shirt, put his arms around Elizabeth, and drew her to the sofa, kissing her and saying affectionate words. Elizabeth knew almost nothing about this side of love. They didn't talk about such things at home, and at school the girls never went further than kissing. Suspecting nothing, Elizabeth was calm. But suddenly he threw her on the couch, and the airy skirt of the dress was not a big obstacle. Elizabeth felt a sudden pain. She felt sick, realized what had happened, and cried to her heart's content. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed. Jack lay contentedly sprawled on the sofa. Elizabeth shrank into a ball and looked in the mirror hanging over the sofa, noting the swollen face from tears and the darkened patches of skin on his neck and lips from kisses. It was creepy and disgusting to see herself like this. And how she would tell her grandmother and sister about it, she dreaded to think. Jack looked at his watch and fidgeted. It was 7 hours before the train arrived. "Get up and get cleaned up," he commanded. "Hurry to yours, get your clothes and money. Let's go." Elizabeth imagined what eyes her grandmother would look at her if she found out. How her sister would react. She was scared, wanted to scream, to hide from everyone and not go anywhere. She was afraid to go with Jack, but she was afraid to go home too. What to do? Upon reaching home, Elizabeth left Jack around the corner, sneaking into the house from the back door herself. Her sister and grandmother were in the vegetable garden. She quickly gathered some things from her clothes and shoes, and, taking almost all the money from her grandmother's cash register, took one last look at her bed and decided to leave the house. She found a piece of paper and quickly wrote in pencil, "Gone with Jack. Address later, money back." Elizabeth and so they went for the second day, 4 more to the end of the road, and then by bus 200 Chem. Jack hid the money in his breast pocket. It was safer, and it was easier for him to buy food. After drinking a lot, he slept on the top shelf. Houses, towns, villages, forests, and meadows flashed by. It was very beautiful outside the window. Although Elizaveta never went far from home, she did not notice all this. Her mood was depressed, especially after another molestation by Jack in the restaurant. What am I doing? Why am I allowing this? But I can't have a scandal right in the train car. It's embarrassing. She wanted to get off at any station, to run away somewhere so that no one saw her, no one knew anything. She did not imagine the beginning of family life in such a way. She thought it would be beautiful, solemn. With all her being, she realized that it was not what she'd expected, but some force and fear did not let her go from this ruinous path. The woman sitting in the compartment sometimes looked sympathetically at Elizabeth, shook her head without saying anything. Finally, they reached the desired station. They got out of the carriage and walked to the bus station. The bus was in 3 hours. Only now Elizabeth noticed the fabulous nature of this region. Tall cedars with dark green paws hanging down clung to each other, swaying slightly in the breeze. It was summer. The intoxicating smell of pine needles penetrated her lungs. It was easy to breathe, and Elizaveta's mood lifted. She imagined a taiga village, wonderful nature, clean air. Suddenly struck her. "Do your parents know that we are going?" "No way. Let it be a surprise," Jack laughed. The month of June was coming to an end. On August 1, the entrance exams to the university began. Nothing, thought Elizaveta. I'll get acquainted with his parents, and in 2 weeks I'll go to the correspondence department. Jack went somewhere, then came back with 2 guys. It turned out fellow villagers. All 3 of them were drunk. They decided to celebrate. Jack pointed proudly at Elizabeth. "That's mine." One of the guys said, "What about Leslie?" "She was waiting for you, but she's already with child, with a soldier, to be." And all 3 of them laughed. Elizabeth felt uncomfortable. "God, where have I gotten myself into?" she thought. In spite of everything, she still loved Jack, and she wanted to be with him. But as they approached Jack's house and she saw his family, she realized that she had really gotten herself into some kind of den. The house was not very old, but it was neglected, and there was wormwood growing in the garden. 4 dogs greeted them with frantic barking. Then came a woman with braided, uncombed hair, wearing a dirty dress and smelling of booze. It appeared to be his mother. Elizabeth remembered Jack singing about his mom, and she felt uneasy. Both sisters were also tipsy and unkempt. "Who did you bring, son?" his father asked, barely able to stand. "My wife," Jack answered. Everyone stood and stared in amazement at Elizabeth, a clean, pretty girl with intelligent eyes. The older sister, slanting her eyes at Elizabeth's blouse, asked, "And why the hell did you bring her here? We have nothing to eat ourselves," and, stumbling, went along the wall. Elizabeth was horrified and wanted to go back immediately. Jack put his arm around her shoulders. "Don't, Elizabeth. Don't be afraid. They're good, just a little drunk." They entered the house. The place was a mess. 2 little girls about 45 years old slept in a corner, on a sweatshirt with a big Siberian cat nestled next to them. There were no doormats. The floorboards were unpainted and dirty. Elizabeth shrank back, not knowing what to do. Then the owner of the house, the mother, came in. Joyful, with tears in her eyes, she began to embrace her son and Elizabeth. "Son, do you have money? We should celebrate your return. It's not every day we meet our son, and you've brought your wife, a pretty girl, too. We should invite the family, or they'll be offended." "We often go out with them," the mother said, and looked at her son questioningly. Jack hesitated a little. Then, agreeing with his mother, took out of his pocket the money left over from Elizabeth's grandmother's expenses and gave it to his mother. Taking the distraught Elizabeth aside, kissing and holding her close, looking into her eyes with boundless devotion, he said, "Elizabeth, let us celebrate our meeting, our wedding. I with you and you with me. We don't need anything else. We love each other so much. I'll earn money and send it to your grandmother after a month and a half. Vala, I wanted to go to a correspondence school. You'll have time, Elizabeth. We can do it next year." Elizaveta went back to her things and counted the money left in her purse. There were 2 rubles and 36 kopecks. That was all she had left. What happened then she did not want to remember. Jack's family had gathered. They all liked to drink, bought cases of vodka, snacks, and started a grand drinking party. First they drank for the arrival, then they shouted bitter. Jack got so drunk that he forgot about his young wife, and Elizabeth slipped into the yard behind the barn and cried bitterly. She clearly realized that nowhere cannot go. She has no money, and to ask her grandmother does not allow conscience. She was tormented by the thought of how and when she would repay the debt and what to write to her relatives about her stupidity. 2 months passed. At first Elizabeth tried to put the house in order, but she did not see any results. Jack and Elizabeth were given a small room with a bed, a table, and a corner of the stove. The bed could not be called bed. The food was potatoes and milk, and it was good that there were 2 cows, which Elizabeth learned to milk, and it became her duty. Relations with her sisters did not work out. Elizabeth felt like a stranger who had accidentally entered the house. The sisters, unashamedly scandalizing each other, began to put on things without asking her about it. "Why do you need them? You're so young, and you've already snatched up our Jack. We have to make our own destiny. We have to be liked by men. And you're not for strangers to look at." They were often gone for 2 or 4 days at a time. The kids were crying, looking for their moms. Jack's mother was a wastrel woman. She was about 48 years old and looked 65. Toothless with stinking breath, she was constantly swearing and was dissatisfied with everyone and everything. Although looking at her closely, especially after the bath, one could see traces of her former beauty. And the children could boast of her appearance. Jack's father was calm. It didn't take much intelligence to realize that he had once been mired in this swamp. One day, sitting alone and looking at Elizabeth, he said, "I am sorry for you, girl. I loved my wife so much when she was young. She was so beautiful. But there was nothing I could do. She had all her relatives born and raised in a drunken frenzy. In the end, I became part of that swamp myself. I couldn't bring up my children with dignity either." Elizabeth did not catch the secret meaning of Jack's father's words. Soon their family was visited by the district police officer about the fact that neither Elizabeth nor Jack had registered, not working anywhere. Yes, there used to be an article for idleness, and Jack, after mobilization, never came to the military enlistment office. "And these are guests?" the mother brazenly lied to the policeman, pointing at her grandchildren. The family found money for only 1 ticket for Jack, and he went to the district to solve problems. There was no work in the village. Elizaveta, not having a specialty, was temporarily hired at a neighboring state farm as a calf breeder. Jack got a job as a mechanic. Every day, Elizabeth rode her bicycle to work. There was an opportunity to send her grandmother a debt. For Elizabeth, $100 was an unaffordable sum. She received a little $50 a month. Writing a letter to her relatives, she promised to send the debt, wrote that she was doing well, that she was happy, but did not give a return address. At work, her partner was Aunt Olivia, who treated her very warmly, almost like a daughter. Seeing how thin Elizabeth was, Olivia fed her buns and cakes. Soon Elizabeth realized she was pregnant. Olivia, noticing that the girl had become pale and often vomited, asked, "Are you expecting a baby?" "I don't know," Elizabeth replied. "Well, go to the midwife." At home, she shared with Jack. She thought he would be happy, but he was not happy and asked her to have an abortion. "The first abortion is undesirable, and you're a long way off. So, girl, you're going to be a mom. The next appointment is in 2 weeks." The midwife made a card, wished Elizabeth well, and told her to eat better. Elizabeth and Jack did not register their marriage. She was not yet 18 years old. Another month passed. Elizabeth began to suffer from severe toxicosis. She became weak and her food was poor. She no longer dreamed of studying. Sometimes it seemed to her that she would soon die without seeing her family and the baby. Sister Barbara urged Jack to get rid of the child. "This baby will tie your hands. She's from Washington. She won't live with you long. You'll be paying child support till you're 18, you fool. Think about what's in store for you. Your Leslie's getting a 2nd year of child support and living on it, and you're gonna pay for it, you dumbass. Don't you dare register with her." On the one hand, Jack is used to Elizabeth. He liked her, and he even listened to her in some ways. But she's his own sister, his blood. She wouldn't give him bad advice. Besides, Barbara is older, knows life better, and she herself also received alimony. He also saw that young men at the state farm were looking at Elizaveta, and it made him angry. and Elizaveta, in turn, asked him to write an application for an apartment and move to the state farm. She already liked working with calves. True, the team was not very good, except for Aunt Olivia. The women liked to drink, celebrate everything, wash everything, and often swore with the mat. Elizaveta wanted to get out of her husband's family and live separately, have a child and be a mistress. She managed to send her grandmother 30 rubles, and she was pleased with herself. I get maternity pay and send all the money, she thought. New Year was approaching. Everyone was preparing for the meeting. There were queues in the stores. Everyone wanted to buy presents and groceries. Elizaveta did not see any money from Jack. He often drank his paycheck with friends or relatives or gave it to his mother, a holy thing. Elizabeth wanted to have a good holiday. Prepare a table, like at Grandma's, buy small gifts. She was happy in her own way. The belly is already rounded. At the reception, the midwife said that soon expected to move, that it is time to wear spacious clothes, which of course she did not have, and buy was not on what. Still, by New Year's Eve, she had raised some funds. She bought Jack some razors, her children some toothbrushes, her sisters some pantyhose, her mother a handkerchief, and her father some socks and a handkerchief. She walked on, pleased with herself. Though the gifts were insignificant, she hoped they would be welcome. Leslie congratulated her grandmother with a card, too. Elizabeth felt so good. She walked leisurely. You can't ride a bicycle in winter, and the carriage left when she was at the store. 7 kilometers on foot was not so long. There were coniferous trees covered with snow all around. It was very beautiful. Frosty air slightly tingled my cheeks. It was so easy to breathe that she walked the distance to the village without feeling tired. The house was tense. Jack wasn't home. There were potatoes in a cast-iron black bread on the table and a cold kettle beside it. The oven was also cold. New Year's Eve was not even smelled. Elizaveta became heavy and resentful. She went into her room and lay down, feeling weak and dizzy. She wanted to sleep. In the kitchen, the sisters-in-law were bickering. Both of them did not have regular jobs, citing that there was no one to leave the children with. Occasionally, they worked part-time. Elizabeth fell into a light sleep. She was awakened by a rumble, something falling. The sisters were discussing family life. She heard that Jack has been seeing Leslie for 2 months now, and she doesn't know, and that he would be spending New Year's Eve with his old girlfriend. Elizabeth was numbed by the news, choked up, wanting to scream with resentment so painful that she could not find the words to describe it. Beyond such betrayal, the name Leslie, the name her sister bears. Mother came in and asked her rudely, "What have you brought in your bag?" Elizabeth stood up, took the bag and handed over the gifts. The new relatives did not expect such a turn, stood in a daze and to some extent even rejoiced. But then the elder sister Barbara, cursing foully, said, "You send your remittances of $30 and you feed us with handouts. You're a good little snob. Jack won't marry you. You're not 18 years old yet, so your degenerate will not get alimony. Do not wait." Elizabeth cried bitterly and went to her room without saying anything in reply. She had long ago guessed that the sisters were going through her bag, and that she had sent the money. They found out at the post office from a friend. She no longer wanted New Year's Eve or the baby she was carrying. God, what am I going to do? How am I going to get out of here? God help me. In the other room there was laughter and some kind of commotion. They decided to celebrate New Year's Eve, Elizabeth thought. She calmed down, only tears rolled from her eyes without stopping. She spent New Year's Eve on her bed in her den. Jack wasn't home. When the noise died down, Elizabeth got up, dressed, and went out into the yard. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. There was noise in the village, and lights were burning. Not knowing why, Elizabeth walked up to the house. The windows were not curtained, Elizabeth saw a group of young people celebrating a holiday. Jack was not with them. She breathed a sigh of relief and turned and wanted to walk back. "You creep, you're watching," she heard. Jack was standing in front of her. He had been drinking heavily and had gone out for a smoke. Furious, he ran up to her, grabbed her arm and pushed her so hard that she fell on her back. "I loved Nastya for a long time, and you yourself imposed on me," he shouted angrily and desperately kicked her in the stomach. Elizabeth felt sick. She felt dizzy, nauseous, and her ears were ringing. She lay on the snow, unable to get up. Jack spat to the side and walked toward the house. The only thing she heard was, "You, Vadarochka, calm down." "I love you, sweetheart," Leslie said affectionately. She woke up when she felt someone dragging her through the snow. "You've got to be so drunk." "She might freeze to death," some man said, dragging her toward Jack's house. The door was open. The man dragged Elizabeth into the hallway and left. She struggled to get to her room. It was very hard to breathe. Her lower back and stomach ached. Alex, one of Jack's brothers, came back in the morning and, seeing Elizabeth sleeping alone, decided to have some fun with her while his older brother was away. Elizabeth was his age and liked him. He often saw his brother treat her roughly and felt sorry for her. He wanted to be with her, so he ventured out. But when he put his hand under her skirt, felt something sticky and saw blood, he realized that something was wrong with the girl. Alex got dressed and quickly ran to the doctor, who, fortunately, was at home. Elizaveta was taken in the director's car to the district hospital. She lost a lot of blood and was often unconscious. She went into premature labor. The baby girl who was born was dead. Jack found out about it 3 days later. Both he and his relatives were afraid that Elizabeth would tell the police station the reason for her condition, although everyone in the village knew that Jack had beaten his wife. Leslie threw him out. "Go and find an alibi for yourself. I don't want to go through with this case. I have a child." Elizabeth recovered very slowly. Weakened body and constant malnutrition affected the girl's condition. People from the state farm came to visit her. Many people donated blood. The relatives from her husband's side did not come, and Jack himself was only twice. When he saw her weakened and thin, her face graying, he decided, why would he need such a wife? And it was unlikely that she would be able to give birth again. But when Jack was summoned to the investigation department and explained what he would face in case Elizabeth filed a report on his behavior, the mood of the family changed dramatically. Jack's sisters and parents visited her. They were courteous, brought groceries, sympathized, and her mother even cried. Alex suffered the most. He was being drafted into the army in the spring. Alex decided that if Jack throws Elizabeth out, he will find her and will definitely marry. Elizabeth even seemed that everyone loved her and that she was previously unfair to her husband's kin. Jack's feelings also sharpened. He began to come more often, long sat with Elizabeth, kissed her hands, tenderly embraced. Elizabeth perked up. The process of recovery went faster. A healthy blush appeared, a sparkle in her eyes. Alex also came a few times, but he came alone, without his family. Elizabeth knew that if it weren't for him, she would probably have died, and she was grateful to him. But he always stood there and was silent, only looking at her with all his eyes and thinking about something of his own. Elizaveta had no idea of his feelings. Elizaveta was discharged at the end of February. She did not go to court because she thought it was wrong to report her husband and make a mess of things. She wrote to her grandmother and Leslie that she was doing well, that she was working, and that she and Jack wanted to visit them in the summer. But as it turned out, spring came. The roads were so muddy you couldn't get through. The mail hadn't come for a month. The grocery store hadn't come either. Jack's family started fighting and drinking again. Alex had been in the army, and they'd been drinking for a week. Jack quit his job and spent nights at Leslie's. Elizabeth was temporarily out of work because of the road. She washed, cleaned, cooked at home. One night, in front of everyone, Jack said he wasn't going to get married anytime soon. I don't want a family. I don't want to live in bondage. I've had enough women to last me a lifetime. What about me? Elizabeth was confused. Why did you follow him? Did you think you had found a simpleton and wanted to settle down? Barbara shouted. You should have gotten out of here a long time ago. You wanted to have a baby and live off child support? Elizabeth left the table, a lump in her throat. Give me the money for the ticket. I'll leave right away. Here we go. Here we go. And when you came here, who gave you the money? What a hottie. Look for someone dumber than us. The next day, Elizaveta wanted to borrow money from the neighbors. But all the neighbors knew Jack's family, and no one wanted to lend. I can't wait for it to dry. I'll get a job and leave here with my first paycheck, Elizabeth decided. In May, buses and cars started moving. Elizabeth went to work with the calves. Aunt Olivia also advised her to leave. As long as you're alive and well, go away. You don't belong here in this family. You'll ruin yourself, or you'll get drunk like them. And then came the long-awaited paycheck. For a week, Elizabeth gathered her small belongings, received the settlement, took the workbook and characteristic from the place of work. She happily hurried home. In the morning, she decided to leave. She didn't tell anyone about her plans. Jack didn't care about her. He'd been on a bender for a week. Her father and mother were living their own lives. Her sister had had another fling with a man and left for a neighboring village, taking her children with her. But Barbara was on the alert. She watched Elizabeth as she did her laundry and put away her clothes. The bus that passed through their village passed by every other day. In the morning at 77.30, Elizaveta had prepared a bag from the evening. At the bottom, she put all the money and documents. She went out into the yard, went into the bathhouse, then returned to the house. Barbara wasn't there. While Elizaveta was washing, she did not notice how she had slipped to the gate. Her bag was under the bed. She had not bought any new things, some of them worn out, some better ones taken by her sisters. She picked up the bag and was glad that it was light. It would not be so heavy on the way. She lay down on her bed and thought for the first time how she would live her life. She was ashamed to return home in front of her relatives for her marriage. She was also afraid of her grandmother's reaction, her judgmental eyes. Leslie might still understand, but Grandma, I wonder what her classmates would think, probably condemn her. And Anna, her favorite teacher. Soon she fell asleep. In the morning, at 6 o'clock, having milked the cows and filtered the milk, she went into the house. Everyone was asleep. She looked longingly at Barbara's children. She especially liked the boy. She played with him more often and felt sorry for him. Glancing at her watch, Elizabeth drank a glass of milk and bread, took her bag, and quickly left the house. The bus arrived on time. Elizabeth was the only passenger on the bus. The chauffeur said, "You will pay. They will sit the controller." Elizaveta sat down and nodded off. It was 60 kilometers to the next stop. The controller got on the bus and they drove off. After chatting with the driver for another 20 minutes, she decided to pick up the passengers, feeling a hand on her shoulder. Elizabeth woke up. "Pay the fare," she heard. Elizabeth quickly unzipped her bag and was stunned. Everything in the bag was torn. There was no money. Her employment card and characteristic were torn and crumpled. There were some things missing. Elizaveta felt sick. She turned pale. "Maybe when I was milking the cows," she thought. "I'm sorry, I don't have any money," she whispered. Then why did she get on the bus? But it was there. Someone had taken it. There was disapproval on the bus. The controller asked the driver to stop and let Elizabeth off. The girl stayed on the road. The bus, dusting, quickly disappeared. Despair gripped Elizabeth. She sat down on the grass on the side of the road and, dazed, sat for 2 hours. During that time, no one passed in either direction. It was morning. The weather promised to be hot. The sun had already risen above the trees. The air was intoxicating. Meadow grasses were blooming. thinning a light fragrance. Coniferous trees of rich green color stood in a wall along the road. How beautiful nature is here, and how lonely and bad I am here, Elizabeth thought. There was no one to go back to, and there was no way to get home. No food, no money, and so far away. Tears streamed down her cheeks. What have I done? I've ruined my own life. She realized that Barbara had taken the money and thing. There was no way I was going back, so I had to go forward. Elizabeth got up and walked down the road following the bus. She walked for quite a long time. It must have been about 2 or 3 in the afternoon when she heard some movement behind her. A tractor-trailer was catching up with Elizabeth. It was driven by a man in his 60s. "How far are you going, girl?" "I'd like to go to the railroad station." "And when will you get there?" laughed the man. "It can't be helped. The bus will be only the day after tomorrow," said Elizabeth. "You should sleep less, then you wouldn't be late. Get on the trailer. I'll take you there, and it's about 80 kilometers to the station. The buses run more often there." The man smoked and, after waiting for Elizabeth to get on, started on his way. On the outskirts of the village, he stopped. "I don't want to get into trouble with the police, so I'll go on my own." "It's not far," said the tractor driver. "The station is still 80 kilometers away." Whether she would be able to get there without incident, she did not know. The girl was glad that the night would not catch her either in the field or in the forest. When she reached the bus station, she learned that the bus would be at 10. She was afraid to go in the dark. There was nowhere to sleep, and what was the point of waiting for the bus? She had no money anyway. It was getting evening. The cashier closed the cash register and left. Elizabeth stayed alone in the room that was considered a bus station. "I have to close the bus station. It's time for you to leave." "There won't be any buses," said the cleaning lady. "Close it with me, please," asked Elizabeth. I got off the bus. I have no acquaintances or relatives here, no hotel in the village either. I don't know what to do, and I'm afraid to spend the night on the street. The woman, thinking that there was nothing to steal, agreed. After locking Elizabeth up, she quietly went home. It was tough sleeping on the bench. No comforts, and she didn't need them. Since morning she had eaten nothing, only drank water from the column. The girl expected to have lunch at the station in the cafeteria, buy a ticket and groceries for the train. But it happened that there was no station, no groceries, no train, and no money. What is waiting for me? How do I go on? She was terrified. In the morning, the cleaning lady opened the door. Elizabeth thanked her, went out quickly, did not wait for the bus, left without asking anything. Elizabeth did not know what to do next. Borrow money from someone, but who would give it to her? To go to look for a job, but where to live and what to eat before the paycheck? She saw a column, went up, washed her face, and drank water. She asked a passerby for directions and walked. She had to get to the railroad station by all means, and then what would happen? She was lucky. There was a milk truck on the road, and she raised her hand. The driver, a young guy, smiling with a sense of humor, was on his way to the dairy. It turned out to be on the way. "Only girl, please don't be silent and sing something for the fare." "Where are you going, Birdie?" "To the railroad station." "Going somewhere else? I guess you're going to enroll?" "Where to, if it's no secret?" "Wherever they'll accept you," Elizabeth answered. "I can't understand you girls." "Always want something? Always dreaming of something. Live more simply, and it will be sweeter," he said, and laughed. This relaxed conversation reminded Elizabeth of another life, not the one she had had for the last year. She felt better, her mood lifted. "Where's the song?" Elizabeth had never sung for the last year. She had even forgotten that there was such a state when she wanted to sing. She thought for a while and chose the same song about her mother that she had heard from Jack. Chauffeur liked it, and she was a little distracted from her thoughts, but the feeling of uncertainty, The insecurity, the fear of the unknown. The guy's name was Jacob. He looked at his watch and said, "I'm on time to take you to the station. May you be lucky enough to get in." This simple kindness filled her soul so much that she wanted to kiss the guy. She was very happy. She had never imagined that she would get to the station so quickly and safely. Elizabeth stood in front of the station. "Lord, help me," she prayed. The bus would arrive at night, and the parking lot would be 2 minutes. Feverish thoughts flashed through the girl's mind. How to sit down without a ticket. It would take 6 days to get there. It would be possible to use electric trains for short distances, but there are no electric trains here, and the trains are every other day. What to do? Where to get money? An empty bottle caught her eye. She decided to collect all the bottles she could find, turn them in, and get a ticket for as much money as she could afford. But there were hardly any bottles at the station. She found only 2. There was a glass recycling center nearby. They gave her 24 cents. At the station, she bought a bun and tea. Hunger was making itself felt, for she had not eaten for 2 days. The evening was approaching, and with it the arrival of the train. Elizabeth, "Wow, you've got a lot of claims," the young, slender conductor told her. "I don't know who you are and why you're going to Washington without a ticket. Maybe you're going to jail, and I'm responsible." The car door closed, and with it the possibility of leaving disappeared. The train was moving fast. She went to the station, sat down on a bench, and spent the night like that. The next day there was no train. Elizabeth hung around the nearby streets, waiting for the next train. Maybe she'll be lucky, she thought. This day she managed to collect more bottles, as many as 5. She turned them in and even had lunch in the canteen. Enough for half a portion of soup and tea. On a neighboring table, people left 2 slightly bitten pieces of bread. She took them. The second day of waiting was the same. At night the Moskovsky arrived. It was impossible to leave. God, what to do, what to do? She sat on a bench on the platform and wrapped her arms around her head. A hobo walked by with a bag full of empty bottles. The man was drunk. Elizabeth secretly envied him. Across 2 platforms stood a freight train with tanks labeled gasoline. The track workers going around the train were banging the wheels of the cars with hammers. In the middle, right in front of Elizabeth, was a wagon with a vestibule, open on all sides. Elizabeth sat staring dumbly in front of her. The selector announced the arrival of the train. If only someone had lost his wallet, Elizabeth dreamed. All kinds of ridiculous thoughts visited her poor head. Passenger train left. The lights on the semaphore flickered. It was announced that 217 was to be sent from the 3rd track. This told the girl nothing. Suddenly Elizabeth saw the man move away from his bottles. She, like a she-wolf, rushed at her prey, grabbed the valise. One of the bottles fell out and crashed to the pavement with a crack. The man woke up and rushed to Elizabeth. She grabbed the bottles in the bag and rushed forward. At that time, the freight train began to move slowly, and the man managed to grab her by the sleeve of her blouse. "You bitch!" She rushed forward. A piece of sleeve remained in his hands. Having reached the car, she threw her bag in the vestibule, but the bottles could not pull out of the clinging hands of the man. The girl managed to jump on the step. The train was gaining speed. The man angrily threw the bottle at Elizabeth. She felt a strong pain in her head. Her ears rang. She climbed into the car, fell to her knees, tore her left one in blood, and lost consciousness. She woke up in the evening. The sun was already setting, and the train was rushing and rushing. She felt a strong pain in her head. Blood caked behind her ear. Her back ached, her left knee burned. And the train kept rushing and rushing at full sail, clanking and jerking. The wind fluttered her hair mercilessly. It was chilly. It was dark night. Elizabeth was no longer crying. She cursed her rash decision. Jack, her first love and her weakness. Why? Why didn't I go to the police? Why hadn't I reported my situation? I was so worried about him. I didn't want him to be disturbed. And he probably forgot about me. Why am I so stupid? The train had been running non-stop all night, and the sun was already shining, but he kept going. Perhaps it stopped somewhere, but our traveler fell into a deep sleep. No one disturbed her. No one knew about the passenger of the freight train. Elizabeth woke up with thirst and sucking pain in her stomach. We approached some kind of a junction. The train stopped and she decided to get off. There was a box and a small house by the tracks. Perhaps she could find out where the train was going and get something to eat. She walked slowly towards the house. There was a girl of about 10 years old playing outside. "Is Mommy home?" Elizabeth asked. "No. She went with Derek to Grandma's. Grandma is sick, and they didn't take me. They need someone to look after the house, and Daddy's at work." Elizabeth asked the girl to give her some water and some bread. "But don't go in the house. You're dirty and you might steal something. I'll bring it to you myself." Elizabeth grinned bitterly. Wow, people are already afraid of me. The girl soon brought a piece of bread and a half-liter can of milk. Elizabeth sat down on the stump and ate everything greedily. The girl also brought her a mirror and a bucket of water. Elizabeth cleaned herself up as best she could. Her hair was greasy, covered in locomotive soot, and her face was grimy. Elizaveta hastily washed her hands, face, and feet, and asked for a bottle of water to take with her. The lights flashed on the semaphore, and Elizaveta was in the carriage in no time. The train was gaining momentum. Where am I going? Why? So she traveled another day. In the evening, she realized from the names of the stations that she was going somewhere in Canada. She got scared. Where am I going? What am I going to do next? At 5:00 a.m., she saw a big city. It was the Republican Center. It was warm and very beautiful. The sun was coming out of the mountains. The train stopped. She slowly crawled out of her hiding place. She looked at her dress, dirty with a torn piece on the shoulder. How could she go out in public like that? Still, Elizabeth went. Entered the station, found the women's restroom. On the sink lay laundry soap. Elizabeth happily washed herself and drank plenty of water. Her left knee was swollen and a little pus. She washed the wound, took off her dress and threw it in the trash. From her bag, she took out a sweatshirt and a pair of sports tights. Once dressed, the girl walked out into the waiting room and approached the information desk. How much is a ticket to Washington? And on what train is better to get there? There was no money. Elizabeth inquired if there was any work at the station. Anything, no matter. But there were no vacancies. She walked through the neighboring yards, wanted to get a job as a janitor or cleaner, but even here she had no luck. She was afraid to go far from the station. The station was her hope of returning home. She had to collect bottles again, enough for a bun and a cake and tea. She could drink as much water as she wanted from the tap in the toilet, and it already seemed happiness to her. 2 days passed. On the 3rd day, in the evening, the lady on duty at the station came to Elizaveta and asked her why she was not leaving and asked her to show her ticket. Elizabeth was unable to answer anything. The policeman on duty would have to be called in to detain her. Someone distracted the woman. Elizabeth, having seized the moment, hid in the crowd of people going out on the platform. On the tracks was boarding the train. Elizaveta stood in the crowd between 8 and 9 cars. The conductors were talking to each other. "Is your car reserved?" "Yes. The passengers from the rest home will board at Chew, minors their families. So I'm free for now." In car 9, the boarding doors didn't open. The conductress from the 9th carriage was chatting with the conductress from the 8th carriage. Both were young, funny, and laughing about something of their own. 5 minutes to departure came from the selector. The 8-car conductor, having boarded her passengers, asked her friend to come to her for a moment. Elizabeth, with the speed of a wildcat, climbed into the 8 car and quickly snuck through the vestibule into the 9. Ducking down, she ran a little through the car, snuck into the first open compartment and lurked so as not to rattle anything. I climbed onto the second shelf, Then on to the third, where luggage is usually placed, lay down and hid. Soon I heard footsteps. Both conductresses walked along the corridor, looked into the compartment. Elizabeth was not noticed. The door clicked and the compartment was closed. How good it is to serve the compartment. But I like the parlor car where everything is in plain sight. But there is more dirt. Let's have lunch in your carriage. The girls from 6 and 7 will be here. We'll sit till the next station. It's not that far. We'll be there around evening. Come on. Go to your carriage and invite them. Elizabeth heard everything. Both were afraid to sneeze or give themselves away. Soon the laughing and talking were over. The company dispersed, and Elizabeth fell into a deep sleep. The girl woke up with a click in the lock. The conductress opened the compartment. Boarding will begin soon, Elizabeth realized. Nightmare. What awaits me? What will happen next? Everything froze inside her. Her heart pounded hard. The veins in her head pulsed. The train was slowing down. The cars creaked and braked at the next station. The selector announced boarding. Elizabeth was close to fainting. And now she heard talking, shuffling feet, laughter. The door of her compartment opened. 4 girls ran in. The first 2 were about 67 years old, the second about 23. 2 young women came in after them. One of them was taller, full, and black, the other short, blonde. They were escorted in by a large man. He kissed the small woman and asked her to say hello to her brother and invited everyone to come more often. They had a little luggage, fruit, melons, watermelons, and 2 buckets of apricot jam. The black woman took the 2 girls and left the compartment. I've already washed mine, she laughed when she came back. Now it's your turn. The blonde woman left with hers for a while. Then, having settled down, the women began to set the table. The guy brought tea. Blackie said, "Come on, girls, let's eat and go to bed. The older ones will fit on the second shelves, and the little ones with their mothers on the lower ones." The compartment was closed so that the little ones would not run out into the corridor. Elizabeth pressed herself against the wall as hard as she could, her heart pounding frantically. She waited for her fate and realized that she could not escape the moment when she would be discovered. She lay in her hiding place and watched the passengers. Not a word, not a movement of the women escaped her. The dark-haired one was more severe. The other, on the contrary, was soft and smiling, with a kind of unknown warmth emanating from her. Meanwhile, everyone sat down at the table. They cut the odoriferous melon, took out other food. The compartment smelled pleasant and appetizing. Elizabeth hadn't eaten anything for 24 hours, and she felt a little dizzy. One of the little girls looked up and their eyes met. The girl cried, clung to her mother, pointing her finger at Elizabeth and screamed, "Mommy, I'm afraid." Elizabeth was discovered. "Who are you? And why are you here? What is this news? Get down immediately. Let's go to the guide." "I don't need you scaring our children," shouted the black-haired woman. "Where are you going? You probably don't have a ticket, do you?" asked the second woman. The girls fell silent, and all 4 of them kept their eyes on Elizabeth. "Why are you asking her? Can't you see how shabby and dirty she is? Maybe she'll infect our children. Maybe she has lice," the black-haired one persisted. Elizabeth struggled to get down on the floor. Her left knee hurt badly. The wound was swollen and red, and something was oozing from it, and her tights were sticking to her leg. "Wait, Leslie. Let's find out what's wrong with her." "What's there to find out? It's obvious. This shameless girl should be given to the conductor. Let her deal with her," was the reply. Maria, as the second woman was called, looked at Elizaveta attentively and felt sorry for her. She saw the hungry gleam in the girl's eyes, the parched lips, and the haggard and tired face. "Are you hungry? How many days have you not eaten?" There was so much sympathy and kindness in the voice, and Elizabeth was so hungry for good treatment. She couldn't stand it and sobbed. Leslie looked at all this squeamishly. She was disgusted by such a neighborhood. In the carriage, the lights were turned on. Elizabeth's miserable position became even more noticeable, in addition to the unpleasant odor emanating from her. Go wash up and come back. The main thing is not to be seen by the conductor. Maria gave her soap and a towel. Elizabeth went out. What are you going to do? Nothing. Just give her something to eat. You can see she's hungry. Let her eat, then we'll decide. After a while, Elizabeth came back and silently put down the soap and towel. There was more food on the table. Sit down and eat as much as you want, Maria said. Leslie abruptly moved away. Elizabeth first awkwardly took a piece of bread and a cutlet. Her hands were shaking, then greedily pounced on the food. The women looked at each other. Leslie had never seen anyone eat like that. When dinner was over, the women put the children to bed and closed the compartment. Leslie asked, "What are we going to do? I'm afraid to sleep. We could get ripped off. Maybe she has accomplices here." Elizabeth sat there, waiting for her fate. "Wait, Leslie," Maria said. "Where are you going? And why are you dressed like that?" "To Washington," answered the girl. "Washington? You couldn't think of anything else?" "What train did you take? Washington doesn't even smell like Washington," Maria snickered. Elizabeth sat there like a hunted animal. "I live near Washington. I foolishly went to Alaska with a soldier. Marriage failed. And now, without food or money, I'm making my way home as best I can." Tears streamed down Elizabeth's face. "Dear women," she pleaded, "I am going alone. I have no accomplices, and I don't know how to steal. Please don't drop me off. I will sit quietly. I won't even touch the girls. If I get off the train at night, where will I go? And thank you very much. I haven't eaten for about 2 weeks. I'm very grateful to you." "Well, quickly upstairs, or in case the conductor comes in," Leslie commanded. And indeed, footsteps were heard in the corridor. The conductress was going around the compartment. Having opened the door, Maria asked her not to make any noise as they put the children to bed and gave her the glasses herself. At night, it was fine. But what about during the day? After all, a fugitive might be discovered. If anything, we'll say that we didn't notice her appearance, that the compartment was open, and we don't know when she appeared. Maria lay down next to the baby. The train was rushing forward. Elizabeth, strangely enough, fell fast and sound asleep. The girls, too, fell asleep quietly, tired from the experience. Leslie muttered something. She was very unhappy with Maria's behavior. But soon she fell asleep too. Maria did not sleep for a long time. Something troubled her. She analyzed Elizabeth's story and felt sorry for her. The girl made a mistake in the choice, being, in fact, still a child without a mother. She and consulted it was not with whom. "Lord, keep out of trouble my girls," thought Mary, and forgot to sleep. It was early morning. Maria woke Elizabeth and sent her to wash up while everyone in the carriage was asleep. When Elizabeth returned, Leslie was awake. "How do you think you're going to get home?" Maria asked. "I don't know. I don't have a penny, and it's a long way to Washington," Elizabeth said. Suddenly, a thought awakened her mind. Looking at Maria, she asked quietly, "Could you give me $50? I would send it to you at once. Write me your address. I won't cheat, I promise." Leslie shook her head disapprovingly. "Oh, that kind of money. It would be better if we took you to a guide." Elizabeth noticed Leslie's beautiful gold rings, a wide chain and intricate massive earrings. One rarely wore so much gold in those days. Not everyone wore wedding bands. Maria calmly remarked, "You know, I thought I should have told the conductor yesterday. Now it's too late. We'll still be guilty for hiding. Come on, get upstairs and cover yourself. They'll be here soon." It was still 13 hours to Karaganda. Leslie and her children were to be met by her husband, Maria's brother, so they were both waiting for the meeting. Elizabeth spent the whole day on the top luggage rack. The women fed her and helped her out if necessary. Maria had been brooding since the morning. When Elizabeth went to the bathroom, she spoke. "Let's give her that $50. "What are you doing?" she objected. "I'm dreaming of an accident. Free trip. If it weren't for you and your pity, she would have been in the police a long time ago. Don't you feel sorry for her? You can't pity everyone." Maria thought again. Something in her soul told her that this girl was in trouble, that if they did not help her, there was no telling what would happen. Where could fate throw her? Maybe to prison, or maybe she would be raped and killed. The thought of it made her uncomfortable. "Leslie, I think I'm going to give her some money." "What? Do you have a little extra?" "If you don't want anything, buy it for your kids or your husband. Why don't you get your mother-in-law or sister-in-law present? You can see she's a crook." At that moment, Elizabeth came in and climbed upstairs. She heard Leslie's last words, and she felt sorry for herself. She felt silent. Her thoughts were not happy. That was how they traveled halfway through the day. The girl seemed to have forgotten all about her. They played merrily. Near Karaganda at the sorting station, Maria said, "I'll give you $50. Of course it would be nice if you would come and show me the ticket." She took out her purse, took out $50 from her wallet, wrote down her address and handed it to Elizaveta. Elizaveta could not believe her eyes and ears, took the money and began to thank Maria. "Well, Maria, you're a fool. At least do not tell your husband that you lend money to anyone." On the platform, Leslie and the children met her husband. Everyone came out of the compartment. Mary was happy to see her brother. The girls were frolicking, and Elizabeth ran to the station. She whirled into the building. 3 ticket offices were open. The 4th was closed. Elizabeth stood at the 3rd ticket office. She wanted to be able to show Marie her ticket in time. There were not so many people, but the service was slow. Behind the window of the 4th ticket office, she saw movement. One man was there at once. Elizabeth was the second. The 2 ticket booths closed and passengers rushed to take the line again, cursing at the inconvenience. All the way to Washington, coach 1. Only general seats left to Washington. "Do you want to take it?" "Yes, let's take the general." Elizabeth was happier than she had ever been in her life. She still had money left, and she wanted to pay it back to reduce her debt. Running out onto the platform, she saw the train gaining momentum. "Maria will probably think badly of me." She was upset. She stood for a while longer, then began to prepare to leave. She went to the store, bought herself a simple chintz dress and groceries for the road. She wanted to go to a bathhouse, but she could not find one nearby, and she was afraid to go far from the station, in case she got lost and would not catch the train. She spent the night at the station, and in the morning she got into her car, took the second shelf and happily lay down on the hard surface. It was going to be a long journey, but now she was not afraid of anything. She had a ticket, groceries, and still had $3.74 left. She was a rich woman. In the common carriage, the passengers were changing quickly. She did not hesitate to collect the remaining bottles and put them under the bottom seat. One of the women forgot her bag in the carriage. When she arrived in Washington, D.C., she had a lot of bottles. They rattled every time she moved, but Elizabeth was not ashamed of it. She had to live somehow. The girl at the kiosk turned in the containers, and her budget was replenished. She walked along the platform and the station, again collected bottles that no one needed, and again took them to the kiosk. She spent the night at the station, and in the morning Elizabeth arrived at the university, where she had submitted her documents for admission last year. August was approaching. The 1st of August began the entrance exams. In the admissions office, Elizabeth asked about her documents. The secretary looked at her strangely, went somewhere, and only an hour later brought a cardboard binder. "Why didn't you take the exams last year?" "It just happened. If you're going to enter this year, bring your employment history for the last year and a character reference from your last place of work." Remembering her shredded papers, Elizaveta quietly replied, "I think I'll take my documents. I don't have a characterization, and there is no one to write it." The woman was surprised, but there was no time to question Elizaveta. More and more applicants were coming. The competition numbered about 10 people per place. Elizaveta realized that there were enough applicants without her, with her problems and unpreparedness. After leaving the institute, she sat down on a bench. What to do next? She was afraid of her grandmother. She thought she would be misunderstood. She didn't return the money either. She was afraid of meeting acquaintances, afraid of being questioned. 2 girls sat next to her. It was obvious from their simple clothes that they were both from the provinces. One of them said, "Mabel, I'm afraid we won't pass the competition. Even if we pass the exam, 10 people per place is too many. We don't know what's going to happen with the dorms." At the consultation, I realized that I am unfamiliar with a lot of things, although Veronica said at school that it would be easy for me to enter. I'm also afraid of not passing the competition. Let's try the library technical school. There is a small competition, 2 people per place. They promised to provide dormitory for all non-residents. My aunt told me. Elizabeth, like a drowning man grasping at straws, grasped at the idea. "Girls, where is this library? Are you also afraid of not getting in?" "Yes, I am." And so, Elizabeth is a student of the library technical school. She went to the director and explained why there is no labor or characteristic, but since she successfully passed the entrance exams, she was enrolled in the first course. The term of study, 3 years, a place in a dormitory and a stipend of $10 a month. This in her situation could only dream of. Elizabeth studied easily. She soon liked librarianship. Teachers were pleased with her. It was a good school preparation. The only thing she had trouble with was clothes. Soon the cold weather would come, and she had neither warm clothes nor shoes. She didn't want to go home. It was a shame to arrive without money. Her relatives did not know that she was near, that it was very hard for her. She sent her last letter from Alaska in early June, saying that she was doing well. Money was tight. Her scholarship was not enough, and she had little food. In the evenings, so that no one would see her, she would go out and collect bottles to make ends meet. The girls in the dormitory shunned her, but she was glad to have a roof over her head and a bed. It was October. The cold weather and the autumn rains were beginning. One day, standing at some entranceway to avoid getting wet, she noticed an announcement. "Need a caregiver for an elderly woman. Apply to apartment number 7. Elizabeth, without thinking for a long time, found the 7th apartment. She was opened by a woman of about 35 years old. According to the woman, there was a difficult situation in the family. A mother-in-law lives alone. She is seriously ill and practically does not leave the house. Her relatives are far away. One of her sons is a military man, now somewhere in Afghanistan, and for 2 years there has been no news from him. The mother feels the uncertainty hard, and now there is a new blow. Her first son, the husband of Elizaveta's interlocutor, was killed in a traffic accident. He left behind a wife and 3 children. The youngest twins are only 4 months old. There is no one to help. It was agreed that Elizabeth would come after classes, go to the store, clean, cook, do laundry. When sick, stay overnight. Payment of $5 a month. More cannot, as the grandmother's pension of $12. Elizabeth agreed and was very happy. The roommates in the dormitory were skeptical about this news. Only one, Katya, understood Elizaveta. She was familiar with the laws of hard life. 3 months passed. One night, Elizaveta had a dream about Maria. By this time, Elizabeth could only save $10. She kept Maria's address as the apple of her eye and knew it by heart. In the morning, she was in a terrible mood. What will she think of me? Probably that Leslie was right and I was a con artist. Days and months passed. Elizabeth was doing well in school. She didn't socialize with girls, didn't go to dances, didn't meet young men. She was grateful to her sick grandmother. Catherine, who gave her some clothes. All the clothes were good, but long out of fashion. Her grandmother's sister-in-law, Kimberly, also brought Elizabeth some of her own clothes that were too small for her. One day, as Elizabeth was collecting bottles at the suburban train station, someone called out to her, "Elizabeth, are you there?" In front of her stood her former classmate, well-dressed with a beautiful handbag. She was finishing her second year at the institute and was going home for the weekend. Elizabeth wanted to run away, but after thinking about it, she asked not to tell anyone about their meeting. Soon a young man showed up. The girl was worried that he would not see her in the company of a beggar and hurried to him. What a nightmare. What if Grandma finds out about me? Not that flashed through Elizabeth's mind. Time flies quickly. Already the first year is over. For the summer, Elizabeth went to live with Catherine. 11 months after the adventure, Maria received a notice of transfer of $50. She didn't think about the money anymore and stopped waiting. On the receipt in the letterbox, it said, "Dear Maria, sorry for the delayed debt. Thank you. You helped me, Elizabeth. Good thing I wasn't wrong about her." Maria smiled and sent Leslie a postcard with only 2 words. "Debt paid back." The reply came back, really. "Congratulations." Another year passed. Elizabeth went to Baba Catherine's house after class as usual. As she entered the apartment, she saw Kimberly. The woman called Elizabeth for tea, thanked her for everything, and said that they no longer needed her help. The children grew up a little, and they decided to live together. Catherine did not want to live away from her grandchildren. Elizaveta graduated from technical college. She worked in the library in the technical department. She was already 25 years old. She traveled to her family, paid her debt to her grandmother. Grandmother was in pretty good shape. The meeting turned out to be very touching. At first, of course, she scolded Elizabeth that she ran away without a marriage license, which brought shame on her gray head. But if you came to apologize, you should be forgiven. Then the grandmother was moved and again began to scold Elizaveta that she had wandered about the world and had not sent word for a long time, that she had grown too proud but had not asked for help, that she had been sitting at her side but had not shown her eyes at home. The lamentations and tears stretched far past midnight. On the morning came a new day, and joy settled in the house. A day later, Leslie arrived with her husband and 2 children. Elizabeth's life was getting better. She continued to work in her library, lived in the dormitory for working youth. Elizabeth did not even think about marriage. Young guys who looked at her shunned. She was happy with her existence. She could afford something, but when she saw a thrown bottle, she always wanted to pick it up one day on. The evening shift, a man about 3,235 years old came into the library and asked for a book on mechanics. He seemed familiar to her for some reason. His last name was quite common. There was already a card with the same last name in her box. She put the card on the stranger's card. He signed for the book he had received and walked out. Elizabeth noticed that the man's left hand was in a strange, unnatural position. She took out the first card, compared the pictures. They were very different. Strange, I haven't seen him anywhere, she thought. 10 days later, he came again, changed the book for another, and left. He reminded Elizabeth of someone again, but her work distracted her, and she forgot about him. When he came a third time, Elizabeth was sure she had seen him somewhere before. All evening, she remembered and could not remember where she had met him before, and the man did not recognize her at all. 10 days later, he appeared again in the library. He took a book on metal science. He stayed a little longer, looked at the contents, and went out. It was only at the end of the day that Elizabeth remembered. That's right. I saw his youthful picture on the dresser at Grandma Catherine's. How come I hadn't guessed it before? She was surprised. After all, the last name is the same, and she told me about him. And they had the same eyes. The next time she asked him about Grandma Catherine, they got to talking. Alan told her that his mother had died before she could see him. He, as a career officer, was a prisoner of war in Afghanistan, was wounded in the left arm, for which he was written off and released from military service. He is disabled Group 2 and now learns a new profession. They began to meet. Black Sea coast. A lot of vacationers. Under an umbrella settled a family. A little boy about 5 years old jumped and fell on the sand, brought water in a bucket, and watered his mom and dad. He was having fun. Dad was watching someone. "What did you see there?" the wife asked. In the eyes of the husband flashed a playful light. "Yes," a mermaid came out of the foam. "I've been watching her for the second day. What beautiful eyes the girl has. You could drown in them faster than in the sea. And her mom is nice, attractive. I'll give you that. You're going to drown in someone's eyes." He heard his wife grumbling jokingly. She raised up on her elbow. "Show me your mermaid. I'll go and turn her into a one-eyed daredevil, so that she would not ruin the good young men." She giggled. As soon as she looked in the right direction, her face changed dramatically. She became serious, somehow gathered, stood up, and quickly went to the woman and the girl. Her husband got worried. "Where are you going?" I was joking. He wanted to stop her, but a sharp cry from the child made him look back. Maria was spreading a large towel on the sand. "Hello," she heard behind her. "Hello," Maria replied. In front of Maria stood a young, unfamiliar woman in a dark green swimsuit. "You must be mistaken, but hello anyway, and have a nice day." Of course it's her. It's her voice, the same soft pronunciation. I've heard it more than once in my dreams. The unknown woman knelt down in front of Maria and asked, "Have you ever given $50 in a train car to a hungry wanderer?" Maria looked at the young woman carefully and remembered that poor girl. She couldn't remember how many years had passed since then. Probably 10, maybe 15. "Yes," she replied surprisingly. She did. Alan couldn't hear them, but he saw the two women talking animatedly, interrupting each other, and the face of the young girl sitting next to them. The same mermaid expressed surprise and slight shock. The man became nervous, but decided not to interfere. When Elizabeth came back, Alan noticed a change in her. He had never seen his wife's face like that before. Suddenly, Elizabeth fell to the sand and sobbed. She remembered everything, every detail. She was in a state that only a suffering person can experience. Alan was perplexed. "Elizabeth, my dear, what did she say to you?" "I will go and deal with her at once." Elizabeth raised herself up and barely managed to grab his hand. "Don't go, don't. You don't know anything." She never told anyone about herself. That day they did not swim, although the sun was always reaching for the water. Alan learned what his wife had suffered in her youth. He was struck by the fact that she collected bottles at train stations, picked up a piece of bread left by someone. Having finished the story, Elizabeth calmed down a little, lay down on the sand. Silent, endless tears flowed down her cheeks. "No one will hurt you again, I will not allow," Alan said firmly, stroking his wife's hand affectionately. And a little aside, a girl with big, beautiful eyes asked in surprise, "Mommy, how come?" "You always taught us to think over our spending, to be careful about unfamiliar people. And you yourself gave such money to the first dirty girl you met." "You know, child," Maria said thoughtfully, "at night on the train, I realized at some point that it was my moral duty. A duty to help a person in need.